Welcome into the first edition of the Shuckin Around podcast. My name is Garrett Green. I'm the play-by-play broadcaster and the media relations manager for the Biloxi Shuckers, the AA affiliate of the Milwaukee Brewers, and I am just thrilled to get this podcast up and running for you, covering all things Biloxi Shuckers, even though it's the offseason right now, to still bring you plenty of content, tell these players' stories, tell you about what's happening in the Brewer system, and also up and down minor league baseball as well. We're minor league baseball fans, and so that's why we like to bring you this content. We'll tell you about what's coming up in the pod in just a minute, but first, if you like this podcast, go ahead and find us on YouTube, the official Biloxi Shuckers YouTube page. You can also find it on Twitter at Biloxi Shuckers, on Instagram at official Biloxi Shuckers, as well as on Facebook. Search for Biloxi Shuckers. We'll have this content for you there. You can also download this and find it wherever you might, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can get us there. You can also give me a follow on Twitter at Garrett_Green. Just some good information for you. Generally like to keep up with the Brewers and all things baseball in the offseason, if you would like. Well, coming up on today's podcast, we check in with Sam Dykstra, writer for MLB.com. He keeps up with prospects in the pipeline, and he just finished covering the Arizona Fall League that wrapped up after 6 weeks. So Sam gives us his perspective of how the Brewers players that were out there did, as well as some other prospects from other teams that we could potentially see in the AA South in 2022. Also, we take a look at the Rule 5 draft and which guys could be picked up, as the Brewers did not add anybody to their 40-man roster by the deadline last Friday. So we dive into all of that with Sam. And then after we're done with our interview with Sam Dykstra, we take a look at all of the guys who are Rule 5 eligible, as well as guys who became free agents, both from the 2021 Biloxi Shucker squad, but also from previous Shucker squads, including a couple of guys who have already re-signed in the very short period of free agency. Plus, we take a look at that Rule 5 draft, which guys are eligible for it. And of course, we have to talk about the awards and a couple of former Biloxi Shuckers that came away with some big ones during this award season at the major league level. All of that is still to come, but first, let's dive into the interview. Sam Dykstra from MLB.com. Joining us now on the Shuckin Around podcast, he is from MLB.com. He's a writer there. He's also one of the hosts of the show Before the Show. Sam Dykstra is joining us today. Sam, thanks so much for taking a bit of your time, especially right after the Fall League has just wrapped up for you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thanks so much, Garrett. Yeah, this is perfect timing. The Fall League just ended on Saturday. So yeah, it's a great time to talk about what we saw in the last 6 weeks over there.
How was it covering the Fall League this year? Because it seemed like, of course, I've kept up with it pretty much every year since I've been here in Biloxi, because we generally sent guys to the Fall League. Keston Hero was obviously the MVP a couple of years ago. So I generally keep up with it. And it seemed like it was a really exciting league this season, especially after a hiatus in 2020.
Yeah, I mean, that's the big thing, is that there are so many times this summer, as I'm sure you guys were doing in Biloxi, where we had to pinch ourselves and be like, oh, that's right, we didn't have this last year. It's just nice to have this again. But the Fall League, on top of just the talent there were so many rule changes that went into play, a lot of attention paid to the 15-second pitch clock, the bigger bases, the pickoff moves. So there was a lot of moving pieces, and it felt fresh this year. Not only is it like, oh, we haven't had this in 2 years, but also it was a slightly different product, which was kind of exciting.
Were there any of those rule changes that you were like a bigger fan of than others? I mean, we didn't have defensive shifts here in the AA this year, and I was a big fan of that in the second half. We had a lot of lefties who got hits that I'm watching, and I'm like, at the big leagues, that's an easy out. And then I know that there was some ABS that was involved as well. So was there any rule change that you particularly liked, or you're like, they can scrap this one?
Yeah, I mean, I'm generally in favor of the 15-second pitch clock. The only thing I have to tell people about constantly, and especially this happened this year in the Fall League, is that there are some growing pains that happen with it. There were a number of times where I saw it on both sides. Pitchers and hitters weren't ready in 15 seconds and were getting automatic balls or strikes called, and they were kind of confused, being like, what do you mean? So I was there for the first 2 weeks. I didn't get to see if guys adjusted. I know that it did shave some time off. Games were shorter in the Fall League this year, which is the whole goal of the process. We saw that in Low A West this year, and it sounds like guys got comfortable with that as the summer wore along. So I think the 15-second pitch clock guys are really warming to. It's going to take some time. If it ever does come to the majors, expect it to be awkward in April and maybe a little bit of May, but the reason why we're putting these in the minor leagues right now, or Major League Baseball is to get guys who are eventually going to be major leaguers used to that process. So maybe that growing process will be out of their system by the time they do make the show.
Yeah, I think we had, because obviously there's been a pitch clock in the minor leagues, and it was 20 seconds with a man on base and 15 without. I think I can only recall one time this season where there was an auto ball called on one of our pitchers, and without fail, he picked up the pace the rest of the game, and he was crawling. So I'm interested. That was a point of emphasis for them, and obviously it shortened things up. Now that the fall league's done, before we dive in, I mean, this is kind of, you finally have a little bit of downtime now. Do you have any holiday plans or anything like that?
No. I mean, I'm going home for Thanksgiving. I didn't get to do that last year, so that's a big thing for me. I'm currently based out of Brooklyn. I'm from Massachusetts, so it'll be nice to go home and actually see my family for Thanksgiving this year. But no, I mean, the thing about being in the prospect business is winter leagues are still going on. I know you tweeted about Ethan Small the other day, and we still follow that stuff. And then prospect ranking business is going to be up before you know it. We're going to be talking about our top 100. So the churn still goes, but it is a little bit easier now that everything's kind of set in stone and we can look back on the year and evaluate that way.
That is my favorite thing that people always ask is like, what do you do during the off season? They think that we just sit around and don't do anything. It's like, well, there's the fall league, and then there are the winter leagues that are going on. And then pretty much as soon as those wrap up, you're, like you said, you're kind of projecting what the prospects are going to be. And then all of a sudden it's non-roster invitees to spring training and all that fun kind of stuff. So let's go ahead and dive into some of the guys. And one guy in particular, I know he obviously generated a ton of buzz in the Brewers system this year. He was named the Brewers minor league player of the year, and he lit the fall league up when he was there. Unfortunately, an injury derailed him. Joey Wiemer, and you were there for the first 2 weeks, so you got to see him live and in person. So what were your impressions of Joey Wiemer that you saw out there at the fall league?
Yeah, I mean, as somebody who kind of leads our Brewers coverage over at Pipeline, I had Joey Wiemer's name circled in a big way, especially about halfway through the season. Being a relatively high pick, but somebody wasn't popping on boards because we weren't sure what his hit tool would be. And we didn't know his power was going to be this. And then he just took off at Iowa, Wisconsin. Okay, now how is that going to play in the fall league, where we typically think about it somewhere between AA and AAA level of talent? And it hit incredibly well right away. I was talking to Brewers people in the middle of the season, and they were saying that the thing about Joey Wiemer, he swings out of his shoes. Like, that's just the way he approaches the game. You're going to get a lot of Hunter Pence comps. He's just somebody who's very energetic, brings that to every at bat. But they didn't want to touch that. They were saying, this is what's working for him. We don't want to fix that. We'll fix some of his approach. We'll get him to lift the ball a little bit more, get into his backside a little bit more. But the fact that he brought that to the fall league as quickly as he did was super exciting. The arm is going to play in center field or right field. He's a former relief pitcher from college days. I think he was throwing in the 90s back then. So that plays. He's just electric and all. He's above average runner. Certainly brought that all to the fall league. I was hoping he was going to play longer. A bruised thumb is what ended that fall league early, but a lot of reasons to be high on him. And it's going to be really interesting to see where he fits in that Brewers puzzle in terms of how we rank him, because I do think once he faces AA pitching, AAA pitching, they're going to be able to take advantage of that super aggressive nature of him. But he did make a lot of contact. I think he only struck out like 5 times in 30 plate appearances in the fall league. So answering all the questions so far, just wish we had a larger sample to talk about him down in Arizona.
Yeah, I mean, he hit like 467, I think, 4 walks, 5 strikeouts. So that's, you mentioned it, generally with those guys who are kind of swinging out of their shoes, you think that they're going to have high strikeout numbers and maybe the on base percentage along with the batting average is going to be a lot lower, but they'll have that balance out with the slugging percentage. But it really seemed like he found his way to hit well. And like you said, it's a shame that we didn't get to see more of it, but I also think it was indicative of how good of a player he was and how much of an impact that he made, that even though he only played in 9 games, he still made the Fall Stars League roster, even though he was someone who couldn't participate. Right.
Yeah, no, I mean, that would have been a great exhibition of his skills. I think, a game on MLB Network. Again, he's somebody a lot of us are talking about, but I don't think a lot of Brewers fans are necessarily in the know about him yet. So I think getting access to that StatCast data, thankfully, playing for Salt River, we have a lot of data on a lot of these Brewers guys, but getting it on a stage like that for all to see, I think would have heightened even the excitement in Milwaukee, but or even in Biloxi, because I think he's going to start the year there next year.
And that's kind of what I'm expecting too. And I'll ask you about a couple of guys about this, but it could obviously an incredibly strong end of the season at high A, and then a very strong showing at, the Arizona Fall League. Is that enough for an organization to say, you know what, we've seen all we need. Let's go ahead and push him to the next level. Let's not start him at high A and push him up. Let's just send him straight to double A to start the season.
Oh, it's funny you asked that. The answer is yes. Like, he's definitely a candidate for double A, and I fully expect him to be there. I was almost expecting you to ask, would they skip him over that? Would they send him to triple A?
Yeah.
Because like those are the questions we get all the time. It's like, how aggressively can this guy be pushed? I think they do want to see him get that double A experience. But I mean, he was a college guy coming into the year. Yeah. Sending him to low A was not exactly an aggressive assignment. Mm-hmm. So the fact that he did move up to high A and dominated that level, I think he's answered all the questions of the lower minors. It's just what's going to happen when all of a sudden you're seeing a curveball first pitch. You can't sit on that fastball. You're going to see more breaking stuff. He can hit velocity. Again, it's a guy moving fast with a pitch moving fast. Like that can create a lot of damage. But what happens when guys are moving around the zone and figuring them out a little bit more? I think that's going to come at double A next year. But again, the Brewers aren't going to, they've said they're not going to touch him because everything's working. What happens when it doesn't? Or if it never does, we'll have to see.
That's the hope. But no, we've seen that with obviously the biggest example is a guy like Aaron Ashby, and you have to factor in the lost season as well. And the fact that he was on the alternate site, but he went straight from high A to triple A because he displayed that ability. I think it might be kind of in line with like a Peyton Henry, who was here for like 30 games, hit above 300. They had an injury at the next level, and they said, you know what, this guy's good to move on up. But I'm trying to make sure that he at least makes a stop here at double A, but I wouldn't be surprised with that. You mentioned the StatCast data, and that's kind of led me to my next guy I was going to ask you about. And I don't expect to see him in Biloxi anytime soon, but Abner Uribe obviously lit up the radar gun, and you had him in your column as the most impressive fastball velocity at the Fall League this year. And there are some really good pitchers out there. What stood out, maybe not just the fastball velocity, but for him projecting longer for Brewers fans to be excited about?
Yeah, I think the Brewers are trying to figure out who Uribe is. They know the velocity. You talked about StatCast data. He had the hardest thrown pitch at Salt River Fields this fall, and that's the only place we got StatCast data at least publicly accessible. It was 100.6 miles an hour. When I was talking to people about what he was doing at low A Carolina, they were saying there were times where he was sitting 101, 102, sitting, not just touching that. This is the end of a long season. Again, the lost season last year due to the pandemic. The fact that he only topped out at 100.6 doesn't surprise me that much. But everything you're thinking at home right now about, oh, this guy can throw fast, can he hit the strike zone? Not consistent. I mean, that was a major problem for him this fall. Again, going back to what we were talking about with Wiemer, is that he was facing more advanced guys. Jumping from low A to the Fall League is not easy by any measure. And if you're just used to blowing it by guys, for low A Carolina, they're not going to do that at the upper levels. So you're facing guys who have seen double A, guys who have seen triple A. In the case of like Lars Nootbaars, guys who've seen the majors. Yeah. So they're not going to swing at that crazy stuff. The velocity isn't going to scare them. He kind of really needs to hone that pitch. The velocity is going to be there. Like, I think that's going to get him to the majors someday. But if all he's trying to do is just unleash it and have guys swing, there's going to need to be more there. He's really a two-pitch pitcher right now. He's going to be a reliever. I know they're trying to get him multiple innings just because he is young. He's only 21. Might as well give him looks at 2, 3, 4 innings at a time. But Uribe, the velocity is always going to make us pay attention. It's always going to make him in the top 30 conversation. It's what he does with it from here. And because the control was such a worry this fall, it's, that relief profile becomes even clearer into view.
Yeah. And that's something that unfortunately throughout the entirety of the Brewer system, there's not a ton of velocity built in right now. I know they've changed that a little bit, and you take a look at the top end of their rotation with Burnes and Woodruff, and then obviously Hader and Williams at the back end, all those guys who have come through here. But really, especially from the staff that we had this last year and even up at the AAA level, there's not a ton of velocity. I think Lucas Ursig probably had the best velocity, and he's one of those guys that the Brewers profiled the same way as Uribe. Like, he's probably going to be a reliever long-term, but let's have him be a starter in the minors so that way we can set things a little more for him. We can, get him 2-3 innings at a time where you're not throwing him into a blowout or you're not putting him in with the bases loaded and only one out in a critical game. So they have the opportunity to build and get a little bit more experience in that avenue.
Yeah. I mean, going back to a guy I mentioned before, Ethan Small is probably the top pitching prospect in the system right now. And his strength with his fastball is that it's kind of an invisible. It's just really tough for guys to pick up. You look at his strikeout numbers, you might think he has elite velocity. It's not really there. It's everything else he does with that fastball and his off-speed pitches. So Uribe is going to kind of pop in that way because it would be elite velocity in any system. But again, comparing it to what the Brewers system looks like right now, it's definitely going to stand out a little bit more.
I also got in trouble this year because I kept calling Ethan Small's changeup a curveball because of that big drop that it's got. That's what impressed me. Is our pitching coach came to me. I was like, hey, that 75-mile-an-hour pitch that he's throwing, that's a changeup. And it's like, oh, well, that's why everybody's swinging at it. And he then said as much that he really perfected his arm action. And so he's got that invisible fastball with that long extension. And then you pair that with a big changeup. And that's why he's down in the Dominican Winter League right now and pitching to like a 1.8 ERA. And I'm curious, and I'm sure that, the reasoning is obviously with the Brewers, but if you had to speculate, I'm guessing they send Small to the winter leagues and have him go pitch down there because the season is longer and that's more of a competitive league than like a development league like the fall league is. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, you're facing even more veteran guys than you're seeing in the fall league for sure. I mean, you're seeing some guys who are in their mid-30s who their major league career is over, but they play for their Dominican Winter League, and that's how they continue. And I think that's what he needs right now. He was so dominant at AA and AAA that facing, even if it is the level of play, the level of talent at the AFL is around AA, AAA, it's not really moving the needle for him. He needs to really polish off and see more advanced bats. And that's what you get in the Dominican Winter League. And like you said, it goes on for longer. He's probably going to be pitching longer than he would have in Arizona because he needs to make up those innings. And they really do project him as a starter. So adding on those innings for him is especially crucial.
All right, back to the fall league, and a guy who everyone around here is excited for because he's a local kid in Joe Gray Jr. Now, he obviously had a great campaign at Carolina this year, struggled a little bit when he was in Wisconsin, not a ton, but still didn't put up the otherworldly numbers that he did. And then this year in the fall league, he seemed like he got to play pretty much every day, but a .069 batting average in 18 games. But I know he still had some loud contact when he was there. What did you see out of Joe Gray Jr. this year at the fall league?
Yeah, I mean, in talking to Joe Gray Jr. before the fall league started, I think I got him right before the first game. I asked him, like, what happened at high A? Got off to such a great start. High A challenged you. What was the biggest challenge there? And he's like, I got too ahead of myself. And I wouldn't be surprised if that also happened in the fall league. It's so easy to get huge eyes there because all of a sudden you're surrounded by so many. I mean, just look at that Salt River roster. That was my favorite roster going into the fall league. Didn't quite work out that way, but Wiemer, Spencer Torkelson, Riley Green was supposed to be there, wasn't. Ezekiel Tovar, I can keep going, but that was a loaded roster. And for Joe Gray Jr., probably thinking like, I need to muscle my way into this lineup and I need to prove that I belong here. That's what so many fall leaguers say. And I wouldn't be surprised if that mentality continued. And that's what led to some struggles, is that he kind of dug his way back in. The tools are certainly there. He's fast. I mean, the biggest thing for him in 2021 was just playing. Yes, he missed out on 2020 like everybody else, but this is a guy who has a history of pneumonia, knocked him out for a while a couple of years ago. He has injury problems. He just needed to play, and he finally did it low A. And I think that's what makes 2021 a success for him. You can kind of throw out high A, you can kind of throw out the fall league. The fact that he played so many games and finally established a foundation of success was huge for him. Now he needs to show that those tools are going to play against upper level arms. I wouldn't be surprised if he goes back to high A next year with an aim of getting to double A May or June. But I think he can cover a lot of ground in the outfield. He can do a lot of other things than just hit the ball. And I think that's what's going to potentially push him to the majors.
Yeah. And you start to look at the numbers and the guys who were here at the end of the year. You're assuming, Garrett Mitchell is probably going to be back here in Biloxi after his struggles that he had towards the end of the season. Health was one of those as well. Tristan Lutz, if someone doesn't, grab him in the Rule 5 draft, he'll probably be back here again. You talk about Wiemer, talk about Korry Howell unless he gets picked up in the Rule 5 draft, which again, I doubt. Then all of a sudden you're saying, well, there's not really any space in the AA outfield. So, but I know that I remember Joe when he was still in high school up in Hattiesburg, the Brewers actually had a tryout here in 2018, just like after a Sunday game. And there was a kid who was in right field who was just throwing dimes to third base and just laser after laser. And sure enough, that was Joe Gray Jr. And that's who they took that year in the draft with that second round pick. But we'll all be excited to see him here. A name that we only saw very briefly, and it's because he got the push up pretty fast as well, was Mario Feliciano. And I think that on that Salt River team, like you said, with all those names that are there, he might have gotten buried a little bit. He hit 318 for the season and he hit 360 during the month of November. So, with him, the question is, how quickly can he be competitive to be on the big league roster, especially since the Brewers just went out and signed another catcher at this point?
Yeah, I mean, he's basically catching depth right now. I mean, there's a reason why they went after veteran types. I think Feliciano could kind of get in that way. Again, injuries, he ran into that problem this year. I would have liked to have seen him more in the fall league. I think he was basically on the taxi squad. There's only so many catchers you can carry. He was around. He didn't need to really make up as many innings as other guys. But he's a bat first type. I mean, this was a guy, I think he was Midwest League MVP a couple of years back. He can certainly hit. He needs to get that experience. He needs to show it at AAA. We'll see how things are going to, I think he probably projects as kind of a bat first backup more than somebody who can win the starting job someday in Milwaukee. But, the rubber's going to hit the road in 2022. There's only so much time where you can say, oh, well, you just need experience. Well, at a certain point, you've been on the 40-man roster for a couple of years and you need to really prove yourself. So I think spring 2022 is going to be huge for him for showing like, yeah, you brought in a veteran type. I'm still here. I can still help out this roster for a team that's trying to win right now.
Good problem for the Brewers to have. Right now, it seems like they're stockpiling a couple of shortstops. Obviously, Willie Adames is up there at the big league level. They have a couple of years of control left for him. We had Bryce Terang, who was here this season, who, early on in the year, I talked to scouts and they were like, well, he's probably going to project as an outfielder. And then they saw him play for a couple of weeks and get comfortable at 21 at AA. And by the time that he got promoted to AAA, I think a lot of scouts thought he was a shortstop. But then also you have David Hamilton, who got added late. And I know that the first thing that jumps off is just speed. And, you look at some of the highlights, he had a triple that I saw on Pipeline where, he's not even running from home to first. Like he thinks it's a home run. It isn't. And it still turns into a 3-bagger. But I think the hit tool is a little bit better than a lot of people expected. You've obviously rated him and covered him. What do you make of Hamilton and his future projections?
Yeah, I mean, again, it starts so much with that speed. He's just somebody who all of a sudden you look up and he does appear on third base and you wonder how he got there. He just turns on the afterburners so well. In terms of how he fits into that shortstop conversation, I think he's more of a second baseman. I know he split time there. The arm isn't quite enough. It can like hold its own there in a pinch. But if you're talking about major league capable shortstops, I think he's probably going to end up moving to second base long term. That's okay. Like that's still a up the middle position. You still need to be plenty athletic to play there. So I think he can provide value there. In terms of the hit tool, I think he can hit enough. It's just there's not really much power there. Like I don't think in the fall league at all. I don't think he homered. Looking at the numbers now, he didn't have any homers in 53 games. That's in an offensive environment. That's not really part of his game. He is more of a guy like I'm going to send it to the gaps and I'm going to just eat up extra bases that way. And that's one way to produce a slugging percentage. At a certain point, you want to see him be a 10, 15 homer guy. I don't know if that's going to end up happening, but again, somebody who can play 2 middle infield spots, maybe even center field if they want to try him out there at some point and cover tons of ground there. That's another option. He's a useful player to have in the system.
Now, and this kind of last thing, are there any other guys from the roster that stood out to you, Brewers prospect wise, that maybe are flying under the radar that aren't those big names, the Wiemer, Gray, Feliciano, Hamilton, those kind of guys from that Salt River team that got some playing time?
Yeah. On the pitching side, the Brewers pitching side was not very deep. There's a reason why we haven't really talked about AFL pitchers here. But one guy I want to throw out just real quick is JT Hintzen.
Yep.
Just because the guy mixes in a knuckleball.
Yeah.
I'm a sucker for that. Like I said, I grew up in Massachusetts. I grew up watching Tim Wakefield. The art of the knuckleball is not easy. Now, he doesn't throw it the majority of the time. It's just something he kind of mixes in, and it's got a spin rate of around 300 to 400 RPMs, and he's got other pitches to work with. But just trying that, I love. There's a guy in the Padres system, Matt Waldron, who does that as well. You know, you kind of hit a point where you need to try new things. And Hintzen mixing in a knuckleball just gives guys another look. Even if it's not a great knuckleball on its own, imagine you're sitting there being like, okay, I'm expecting 90, 91, and here comes this floater that you don't know what to do. And there it is, strike one. Like I just appreciate guys who are willing to try it at any stage of their career. So JT Hintzen, I'll throw out there just in case anybody's trying to follow along. He had a decent fall league. I think he struck out at more batters than he did have innings. But he's not like a major prospect, but he could end up working his way into a relief conversation down the line.
I mean, he's a guy who they took in the 10th round, and he was with us for the entirety of the season. And he kind of floated between a lot of different roles. He was kind of a fireman. He was a long inning guy for a little while there. They brought him in, and he got a couple of different save opportunities, and was kind of there. He was kind of the Brent Suter of the staff this year. He just like swept in and got a bunch of victories, low key. But yeah, I know that he had an opportunity to learn that knuckleball as well. From, I think it was Phil Necro's son, who was his coach in college. And so he actually got a little bit of coaching on the knuckleball, but we never got StatCast data on it here, so we could never see when he was throwing it. But you could tell there were some times he got some swings and misses that he was definitely mixing something different in. And he was an intriguing name to look at.
Yeah, I just love that. There are certain times where you kind of sit up straight at a knuckleball because you're just like, I wasn't expecting that even as an observer. And it's one of those little moments that makes baseball fun.
So for the deadline is just passed on Friday for teams to add players to the 40-man. And the Brewers didn't add anybody. And I know, looking at the crop of players they had, I think they had 4 that were in their top 30, none of them that have been at AAA yet. But were there any surprises that you thought maybe the Brewers would have added to the 40-man that they left unprotected for the Rule 5 draft, whenever that ends up happening, whether it's, in December like we're expecting, or maybe post lockout, work stoppage, whatever it is?
Right. Yeah. I was surprised that Korry Howell was left off, because he's somebody who plays multiple positions. He's somebody who is incredibly fast. Like, there is some value in that as a Rule 5 pick. You can find spots on a roster. I mean, Terrence Gore has been making a living out of winning World Series as just a fast guy. Now you have to carry him for the full year. That's not typically what Terrence Gore does. But I think Korry Howell could be of use in some way. Like you said, he doesn't have AAA experience. He wasn't really knocking on the door of the major leagues. There are some things he needs to work on for sure. Is he going to hit enough to be justifiable as a Rule 5 pick? That's something the other 29 teams are going to have to make, or a decision they're going to have to make. But just given his athleticism, given the conversations I was having with Brewers people in the middle of the year of, is there anybody who didn't start out on the top 30 who you think has fought their way on there? And they were like, well, we've kind of surprised at how little people are paying attention to Korry Howell. So even they were aware of what he was doing and what he's capable of. So to leave him off, I think just says more about how far away he is from the major leagues than his ceiling or his capabilities. But I wouldn't be totally surprised to see somebody pop him and just say like, hey, let's see how the bat works. We think we could use your run tool right now.
Yeah. And he was one of those guys that you could tell the first 2 weeks or so that he was here with AA, it was an adjustment, but then he very quickly made it. And the last 2.5, 3 weeks of the season, he was a completely different player. And I think he came up like 3 or 4 home runs shy of having a 2020 season, which, there's only a small number of those. So I agree with you. I don't think that would be, out of the realm of possibilities, though it might be a little bit of a reach. But hopefully he's back here with us in Biloxi to start next year and maybe finds his way onto the 40-man next time around. All right, other guys from other teams that we might see here in the AA South. I'm going to start by asking you about one specifically, and that's JJ Bleday, because his struggles this year at AA were very well chronicled. We played Pensacola so many times. As a matter of fact, we played him 30 times, and Bleday played in all 30 games. He had 219 against Biloxi. He had like 2 home runs, 14 RBIs, struck out 28 times. But it seems like he really turned the corner this year in the Arizona Fall League. We start the season against Pensacola. Is JJ Bleday going to be on the Blue Wahoos starting or in their starting lineup for that opener in 2022, or is he going to be up in Jacksonville?
I would bet he's in Jacksonville. I would probably bet he's in Jacksonville, even if he didn't have this fall league, just because of who he is as a prospect. He, like, lest we forget, 2 years ago was leading NCAA Division I in home runs. He entered pro ball as an advanced hitter. I think he's somebody who, the canceled season really hurt him. He needed to kind of pick up that momentum and keep it going, and just didn't get that opportunity. Sounds like, he slimmed down a little in the pandemic year, which for somebody who was known for their power isn't necessarily ideal. Made some adjustments in the fall league to kind of carry that forward. But I still think playing a full season at AA as a first round pick, at least you got that experience, but now you need to see that next level. I don't think sending him to AA as a 24-year-old next year was really going to do him any good. It maybe would help him mash for a little while and he could get that confidence back, but it would almost hurt his psyche more to repeat a level as a top 100 caliber prospect. We can debate whether he belongs in the top 100 anymore. But for him to repeat a level, I think would almost hurt him mentally more than it would actually help him as a career goes. So even before the fall league, I would guess that he was going to be in AAA. But now that he has had that success, that he's shown the adjustments, that the adjustments have produced results, I think I don't want to say no doubt, but I'll put it 75-25.
I'll add on to your argument here because I don't think he's going to be back either. And one thing that I saw that was big was that a lot of the reports was that he was getting to work with Phil Plantier, I think is who it is. And he was one of the hitting coaches for Mesa, and he's the hitting coach at Jacksonville. They helped flatten out his swing plane, and I think that was where some of his success was coming from. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Marlins said, look, we saw firsthand what it did in the Arizona Fall League. Fall Stars game MVP, put together a great campaign. Were it not for another guy we're going to talk about here in just a minute, probably had a shot at being in the MVP conversation for the league. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's in Jacksonville next season. And with the way he swung the bat in the Fall League, go ahead. We'll see, catch you on the flip side. We'll see you, when the Brewers are playing or when Nashville is playing and those guys are there, and we'll keep up with them. The other guys who stood out to you, though, who we might see here in the AA South coming up next year, were there any big names across the board that, they were probably at high A last year and we might see him here at AA next season?
Yeah, in terms of one that I saw in the fall league was Curtis Mead. Now, he might actually, talking before about like somebody who might jump from high A to AAA, he's already done that for a very brief time in the Tampa Bay Rays system. That was mostly out of need. The Durham Bulls had a couple of roster openings and they needed somebody to fill them quick, and Bowling Green wasn't that far away, so he got called up. But he held his own in AAA, and he said that's when he really felt like, oh, this is a special year. Curtis Mead had an 18-game hitting streak in the Arizona Fall League. Somebody I was getting reports on all year of like, hey, this guy can really hit. He's from Australia. He was traded in a very minor move. He originally signed with the Phillies, and the Rays identified him in the former Gulf Coast League, now the Florida Complex League, as somebody who can really hit. He could potentially play multiple positions. He's played mostly third base and first base, a little bit of second base mixed in there as well. But I'm a big believer in Curtis Mead's bat. I love watching him hit. It's a very simple approach, a very simple stance. He just kind of stands up straight in the box and hits the ball. And I asked him where that came from, and his dad played baseball in Australia and said, hey, this is how you hit. Just stand up straight. When the pitch comes, just hit it where it's thrown. And he has done a really good job of translating that to the Rays system. Now, I think it helps that the Rays have a great player development pipeline, and they've identified something in him with that simple stroke. But I think the next step for him is going to be showing a little bit more over the fence power. Right now, it's mostly to the gaps. I think he can be above average power hitter, but right now he's pretty easily a plus hitter. He's capable of hitting 300 anywhere he goes, including the fall league, low A, high A, potentially even double A to start next year. One other name I'll throw out real quick. This guy just won a Gold Glove award. I didn't see him in the fall league. He didn't play there, but Michael Harris II, the Atlanta Braves organization, somebody who spent this year at high A Rome, probably going to Double A Mississippi next year. You don't win Gold Glove awards by accident, especially minor league wide awards like that.
Yeah.
So he's somebody who is a really good defensive outfielder, can hit a little bit, can run a little bit. Power is maybe the biggest question right now. How much power is he going to show eventually? But he's a top 100 prospect right now. I know Atlanta's super excited about him. He's a local kid from that area. And the way he's starting to put it together and getting a little bit of that national recognition, going to be a big question of how he carries that to Double A and makes that jump. But yeah, pay attention to him defensively. He's really special out there.
Oh, fun. Another great defensive outfielder who can hit for power for the Mississippi Braves. Where have I heard that before with Christian Pache and Drew Waters? And, obviously before I got here, Ronald Acuna Jr. and all those guys. No, I had heard that. And I don't know how much you guys look at, other rankings, but I know Baseball America did theirs. And he was rated as, the number one prospect in their system. I'm sure he's probably going to be pretty high up the list as well. And, generally the Trustmark Park, where the Mississippi Braves play, historically is a cavern. It is just the ball does not fly out of there. But this year's Braves team, there was something different about them, and they just hit home runs at an alarming rate at that ballpark. And I don't know if it's going to carry over to the next season or, they obviously had names like Langoliers and Drew Lugbauer, who had a big fall league in his short stint that he was there. But yeah, just add on another guy. And you talk about Curtis Mead coming up. Yet again, it's amazing how some of these teams profile with their prospects, because you say he's a guy who's got a really good hit tool. He can play a lot of different places. I think about guys like, Mike Brasso, who was there. You think about Miles Mastroboni, who played a lot of different spots. Jake Cronenworth was kind of like that when he was with Montgomery. They just had Xavier Edwards, who hit, like 340 or something like that. Jonathan Aranda, who won MVP. So I'm just going to settle in every single night against the Biscuits and just get ready for another 3.5 hour game with at every at bat with at least 10 to 15 pitches. They just grind through better than just about anybody else. So no surprise that the Rays have yet another high hit tool prospect who might be coming through Double A Montgomery next season.
Yeah, that's the thing about the Rays, is that you can almost pencil in. I don't even want to use that phrase, because the whole point is there are guys who are going to surprise you every year and that are going to become household names in prospect circles as far as that goes. Like Curtis Mead was not somebody we were talking very much about back in the spring. And then by the middle of the season, everybody was like, oh no, he needs to be on this list, which is one of the deepest lists in all of baseball. So yeah, I'm sure there's somebody on that 2022 Montgomery team that we are not even thinking about right now, who all of a sudden is going to become someone we're talking about a lot by September.
Yep. All right. This is a little bit different. Nelson Velazquez, Arizona Fall League MVP, played 4 games here against Biloxi. I think he homered in his first at bat. Did not surprise me at all. So I'm not going to ask if he's going to be back here, because that's another one that I feel like is a no-brainer. Shuckers played the Tennessee Smokies June 7th. Will Nelson Velazquez be playing for the Cubs by that point?
Whew. June 7th. I'm going to say
7th.
no.
Okay.
I'm going to say no. Yes, he did just get added to the 40-man roster. He did have a great fall. And there is a pretty good history of people who do well in the fall league, eventually doing well in the major leagues. Nelson Velazquez still has some hit tool concerns that I think need to be ironed out, and that I think are going to be exacerbated by the time he hits Iowa. The other tools are that, like, he can certainly hit for power. He can certainly chuck it from right field. He's kind of the prototypical right fielder from that look. But I know there's a lot of heat on his name right now. You have to remember, he was the number 29 prospect in the Cubs system coming into this. There were some legitimate questions about him. He had a hot 6 weeks. That's great. He's certainly on my radar more than he was at the beginning of the fall. But I think it's going to take him at least 3 or 4 months for him to show that readiness, even if he's on the 40-man and it's a much easier call-up. I would put his debut date probably closer to late July.
Yeah. And Caleb Killian, who obviously everybody's talking about after the performance that he had, 6 perfect innings in a championship game. He was a big piece of the Chris Bryant trade. Is he one of those guys who he's probably going to go to AAA, or do you think that he might start the year here at AA in this league again?
That's an interesting one. I'm not sure. We were actually talking about this before this call amongst ourselves of, like, where does Caleb Killian kind of rank among the the prospects that we saw in the fall league. I saw his disastrous start to begin the fall league, in which he did not give up or get an out, which was a tough look for him. Looking at it, 15 starts at AA. I think he's likely headed to AAA. I think half a year at AA is probably good enough for him. Turned 24 in June, going to be 25. I would expect him to be at AAA. It's not outside of the realm of possibility that they just want to give him a little bit, one or two more AA starts. I think sometimes we get a little too wrapped up in what an opening day lineup looks like, but Killian, based off what we saw on Saturday, certainly looked AAA ready. The way he was mixing pitches and hitting in spots and keeping guys off balance. So I would probably put it 9-10 that he's at AAA to start the year.
I know this has turned into a lot of non-Brewers related prospects, so I appreciate you thinking on your feet for all this. I have one last one I want to ask you about because it's just personal to me, and that's Brett Baty. And he was on that Salt River squad, if I'm not mistaken. And the reason I ask is because Baty is the last of these guys. I actually saw him play as a freshman on the varsity team for Lake Travis when I was still working in Austin. And that was a year after they had Jared Triolo, who went to the University of Houston and was just named one of those minor league gold glovers. So this is the end of my run. I also saw Kyle Muller and Chris Paddock pitch in high school while they were down there. So I'm trying to see if I can go 4 for 4 with major leaguers, but for Baty, because there's a lot of attention around his name as well. He had a pretty strong fall league. Your impressions of him after, I believe this was his first full season that he had in Pro Bowl.
Yeah, no, Baty is somebody I'm very high on, as somebody who works on the Mets list. So I can definitely speak to him. He's somebody who I think coming into the year, we expected to be more power than hit. And it kind of flipped this year. Part of that was playing at high A Brooklyn and then getting challenged with a move to double A Binghamton. But watching his approach in the fall league, like he can put on a really impressive batting practice. But when it comes to games, he's kind of shooting it in the gaps, putting it with backspin. Not really somebody who's swinging out of his shoes, just trying to make solid contact, if not spectacular contact. So I think that's going to come as he ages, as he gets more experience. Because again, like this is somebody who hadn't even seen full season ball coming into the year. Now he's played for 3 different teams. Defensively, I think he's pretty good to stick at third base. I know there are some questions about that because of his size. He has the arm for it. He looked more athletic in the fall league than I was expecting. He struck out more in the fall league than I was expecting as well. But again, I kind of chalk that up to just the end of a long season after a lost year. I know he was at the All-Site last year. But I think when it all comes together for Brett Baty, he has the potential to be a plus hit guy, a plus power guy, and somebody who's going to handle his own at basically a non-first base position. And that's going to earn him WAR points, as it were. So the Mets need to finish him off. They need to make sure that he gets to that power and doesn't stay this type of 15 home run hitter that he kind of looks like right now and develops into that 25, 30 homer guy that he certainly can be, and maybe even more than that. But yeah, Baty's definitely going to feature prominently in our top 100 update this offseason. And I feel pretty comfortable that you're going to say you saw him as a major leaguer someday.
Awesome. All right. I'll turn it back to the Brewers to end things out here, because again, I appreciate how much you have wandered away from what this entire interview is supposed to be about. But I think I'm like a lot of people. I geek out about prospects, and also, there's a certain point where you're just kind of chasing your tail, talking about the same prospects in your own system, and you like to look outside and see other guys. Obviously, Corbin Burnes named the Cy Young Award winner, and you guys had him on your podcast, the show before the show, back in 2017, if I'm not mistaken. Right. Yep. What were your impressions of Corbin back then? Because that's when he came through Biloxi. And did you think that he had the ability to be as dominant as he was and be a future Cy Young Award winner?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because like back then I was more involved in minor league stuff. It's just like good performers in the minor leagues. Wasn't always looking at it through a prospect lens. So Corbin Burnes was like dominant in the minor leagues. That's part of the reason why we had him on the show. And it was one of those situations where you're kind of looking at him being like, why isn't he popping up on more boards? Like what more does he really have to do? So in speaking to him, he's always seemed like a supremely confident guy. It was almost surprising. I know the Brewers have a history of doing this, but moving him to the bullpen initially, I was like, I don't know if I fully see that in him. He's not like a huge guy. He's not a Josh Hader type or a Devin Williams. It's like, I have this one pitch that just everybody's going to swing and miss, and he's somebody who needs to mix his stuff a little bit more. So the fact that he's developed into now the same guy we saw in the minor leagues, but at the major leagues, blows my mind. I mean, it's incredibly difficult. I'm not going to say I always saw him potentially winning a Cy Young award. That's crazy. But as for somebody who was dominant in the minor leagues, goes to show, like, you can scout tools as much as you want, and that's certainly helpful, but you need to have success. At a certain point, you need to start showing that the stuff you have is going to work. And I actually think it can almost be easier to teach tools. There's certain tools you can't teach. Like, I'm not going to turn into an Olympic runner tomorrow. You can't teach power. You can't teach speed, but you can fine tune some of that stuff. And if you already know how to get batters out, and then all of a sudden add 2 or 3 miles an hour to your fastball, develop another pitch that's going to get guys out, I think that's a little bit easier to do than somebody who's like an Abner Uribe, for example, who can throw the crap out of the ball, but might not hit the zone. Like, that's just not easy to teach control. And he hasn't had that success yet. So it's been really fun to see Corbin Burnes do that. Brandon Woodruff the same way. I think we had him on the podcast before. Great interview with him. Love diving back into that stuff. Right now we have Burnes and Snell, I think, are the 2 award winners that we've had on the pod before. But we've interviewed so many of these guys, now seeing them all make major league contributions, like a Willie Adames, who we had when he was in the Rays system. Who knows how many more award winners are out there.
That's the fun part about this stuff. And especially at this level is that, I've only been here at AA for now 3 full seasons, 4 years, 3 seasons. And people ask me, who are some of the best guys that I've seen come through. And already they're guys that are checking boxes that are pretty substantial stars in the big leagues. And that's what's fun about minor league baseball. That's why we get to cover it. Do you actually get to make it out to games during the season, or is it mostly you've got tentacles and everything, and so you're just MILB.TV and reports and things like that?
It's a mix of both. This year was obviously a weird year. Living here in Brooklyn, Brett Baty played for the Brooklyn Cyclones, which is a short F train ride away from my apartment here. So I saw a little bit of them. I tried to get around. I saw Adley Rutschman when he came through because he was playing for Bowie, which went through the Northeast. So I try to get eyes on a couple different guys. We'll see how that's going to expand next year. Hopefully, knock on wood, pandemic's looking even better come spring of 2022. But yeah, it is so much easier to follow the minor leagues now than ever, with MILB TV being clearer than ever and having more teams than ever. But yeah, a lot of it is just checking in with sources and checking in with guys and saying, like, this is what I've seen and followed. What have you heard or seen on the ground? Because minor league baseball is huge, God bless it, and wouldn't have it any other way.
Well, if you ever decide to make a trip down here to the AA South, formerly Southern League, let us know. We'd love to host you. But thanks for taking some time today. I know it went a lot of different directions, but I really appreciate it, Sam.
Yeah, no, thanks so much, Garrett. Anytime.
So again, a big thanks to Sam Dykstra for joining us today on the podcast. Great insight there about who's performed at the Arizona Fall League, what to expect out of them, as well as the Rule 5 draft. And we'll talk about all the guys who are eligible here in just a second. But his pick, Korry Howell, I think he's right. Korry's a guy who could get picked up by another team in the Rule 5 draft whenever it happens. So certainly an intriguing one to keep an eye on there. Let's go ahead and take just a few minutes. We're going to look at a few different notes for you, starting with free agents. And we're just going to look at the guys who were with the Shuckers in 2021, who will not be back with the team for 2022, unless they sign a minor league free agent deal. That includes the right-hander Jesus Castillo, who obviously was second on the team in starts this year, only behind Noah Zavala. So a real innings eater, for the Shuckers. The left-hander Leo Crawford, who we cataloged it all throughout the second half of the season, but really found his own when he was pitching out of the bullpen. He had a sub-1.5 ERA down the stretch. He is a free agent. Remember, he came over in the Corey Knebel deal but he will be not be back with the Brew Crew unless he signs a deal going into next year. The right-hander Brooks Hall, who had a very brief stint with the Shuckers, had a season-ending injury. He is a free agent after signing a one-year deal. Mitch Longo, who was named the AA South Player of the Month as well as the Player of the Week for the last week of the season. Mitch was one of the best contributors for the Shuckers this season, even with a short stint up at AAA. He came back down at 18 stolen bases, hit a lot of home runs, hit for average very well, but Longo is a free agent, so we'll see where he lands. And the outfielder Alexander Palma, who led the Shuckers in RBIs this year with 55. He is a free agent as well. So those are your free agents for you. One former Shucker free agent note, the right-hander Trey Shupak, he was with the Oakland Athletics, did not play in 2021 as he was injured, former Southern League Pitcher of the Year in 2019. The good news, though, Trey is already re-signed with the Athletics, so we'll certainly keep an eye on him as well. As for the Rule 5 guys, we mentioned it when we talked with Sam. There were 4 guys who were on the Brewers' top 30 list that were not picked up. No players were picked up for their contracts to the 40-man roster. So that includes Korry Howell, Carlos Rodriguez, Tristan Lutz, who is in Biloxi, and Victor Castaneda, who's one of the better right-handed pitchers in the organization, who we'd expect to see in Biloxi next season. So none of those guys are protected from the Rule 5 draft. They are all potential targets to be picked up. You also take a look at Luke Barker, who we talked about a little bit, who was not picked up. Zach Brown is available yet again in the Rule 5 draft. Justin Bullock, who is here, he is Rule 5 eligible this year. JT Hintzen, who was mentioned in the podcast in the interview with Sam, is one of his favorite guys. Hintzen is actually a Rule 5 eligible player. Max Lazar, Carlos Luna, who is here. Braden Webb is Rule 5 eligible as well. And Noah Zavalas, who obviously led the Shuckers in innings pitched and led the AA South in strikeouts this year. He is available for the Rule 5 draft as well. David Fry is available in the Rule 5 draft, and that's one that I might be curious to see if someone would take a flyer. It's very unlikely, and again, he shouldn't be available in the AAA phase of the draft because they'll have him on the AAA roster as he got a late promotion there, but Fry is a guy who put together a good year. Weston Wilson is Rule 5 eligible, had a very strong season with the Nashville Sounds before he had thoracic outlet syndrome. He had surgery on it. Now, he did come back and play at the very end of the fall league. And so Wes is healthy. If he showed a little bit there at the Arizona Fall League, that's another candidate that could maybe get picked up. But again, the Brewers are counting on the fact that these guys, there are enough question marks around them that they're not going to get picked up. And remember, teams have to pick a guy up, put him on the 40-man, put him on the active roster, and he has to stay there for a certain amount of time. But Weston Wilson's one. Of course, Chad Spanberger, Ernesto Martinez are both available. Pablo Abreu, Jesus Lujano, who is here at the end of the season, Javon Ward as well. And then you have a couple of two-way players who have both played in Biloxi, Clayton Andrews, who pitched some last season, and also Lucas Ursig. Ursig's a guy who I think that if he gets another year under his belt and if he shows that he's really able to stick on the mound, that's one that the Brewers are going to have to make a decision on, because I think there's a team that could get him. However, if he comes out next year and he's pitching in the bullpen and he's throwing 98 to 100, if he's developed that ability to throw that fast, maybe the Brewers are fast tracking him to the bullpen. Who knows? But Ursig and Clayton Andrews are both Rule 5 eligible. There was a former Shucker that was added to another 40-man roster. That's Bowden Francis. Bowden was added to the Blue Jays 40-man roster. Remember, he was acquired in the Rowdy Tellez trade not too long after he had gone up to AAA Nashville after he'd started the season here with Biloxi after pitching most of 2019 at AA. But very big for Bowden as he's been added, and we'll see if he might be player number 50 in Shuckers franchise history that makes their way up to the big league level. But it was Bowden Francis added to the 40-man for the Blue Jays. Couple of final notes for you here. Talked about the Arizona Fall League, and we mentioned it in the interview with Sam Dykstra, but Ethan Small is still pitching down in the Dominican Winter League, and he has been fantastic. 5 starts, he has a 1.8 ERA in 20 innings worth of work. The last time out for him was on Sunday night, 5 innings, 2 unearned runs, 6 hits, 1 walk, and 5 strikeouts for Small. And that was when he was going up against a lineup that had Juan Lagares, Leody Taveras, Melky Cabrera. So former big leaguers and guys who are in the big leagues right now. And he was throwing 5 innings of 2 unearned run ball against them. And I think that's part of why he is down there, as Sam touched on in the podcast earlier, the fact that he has an opportunity to play against big league level caliber, and that kind of pushes the needle for him. But he is excelling at that level. So I would imagine he's going to be a non-roster invitee to spring training yet again, and he's going to start the year at AAA in 2020. And if there's any kind of roster spot that opens up for the Brewers, it's maybe Aaron Ashby first, but then Ethan Small is your second guy who's sitting right there who has an opportunity to push up to the big league level. And the last thing that we'll mention on the Shuckin Around podcast today, of course, award season happened last week. And the big news, Josh Hader, the week earlier, was named the National League Reliever of the Year, the Trevor Hoffman Award, named after the former Brewers closer, among others. So that's now the fourth time in 4 straight years that a Brewers reliever and a former Shucker has won it. Of course, it was Josh Hader in 2018 and 2019, Devin Williams in 2020, and Hader again in 2021. Remember, Hader was a starter when he was here with the Shuckers at the back end of 2015 after he was acquired in that trade with the Astros for Mike Fiers and Carlos Gomez. And then he was a starter in 2016, pushed his way up, and then moved his way into the bullpen when he made it up to Milwaukee. And we all know the story about Devin Williams. So that's now 4 straight years that a former Shucker and a Milwaukee Brewers pitcher has taken home the award for the National League Reliever of the Year. And the big one, the Cy Young Award. We were on the Corbin Burnes train all season long, and I pulled into the station. Corbin Burnes, a 2017 Biloxi Shucker, taking home the Cy Young Award. So now, by our rough estimate here on the Shuckin Around podcast, that makes a Cy Young Award winner for a former Shucker, a Gold Glove winner in Trent Grisham in the 2020 season, and of course, those 4 National League Reliever of the Year awards. By the way, you also have a World Series now for a former Biloxi Shucker in Orlando Arcia. If you technically want to count it, Will Smith is also a former Shucker. Remember, when he was a member of the Milwaukee Brewers, he did make a rehab appearance when he was here with the Shuckers in 2016. So Will Smith technically counts, just like Stephen Vogt technically counts. Vogt made a couple of appearances, we should say, when he was with the Biloxi Shuckers back in May of 2018, including hitting a big home run in his second plate appearance. So all of those guys, World Series champions. RC is the one that you can say for sure. The other 2 are former big leaguers that were here on Major League Rehab. That's going to do it for us here on the Shuckin Around podcast. Hope that you enjoyed episode 1. Big thanks again to Sam Dykstra. Again, we'll have other episodes coming up for you, so be sure to subscribe to the podcast either on Spotify, the Apple Podcast Center, or wherever you listen to your podcast. We're also obviously on YouTube, so you can find us on the Biloxi Shuckers YouTube page, as well as information on Twitter at Biloxi Shuckers, on Instagram at Official Biloxi Shuckers, and on Facebook, search for Biloxi Shuckers. You can also find me on Twitter at Garrett_Green. Thanks so much. If you like this podcast, leave us a review. Be sure to subscribe. We will see you on the next time for the Shuckers Shuckin Around podcast.